Hello, welcome to Refiner's Fire, a YCP-produced podcast where we have experienced professionals as guests and we discuss the integrations of faith and work. Today, joined with us is Ben Sands, who is a leadership advisor and founder of Sands Leadership, where he helps CEOs and senior executives build high-performing, healthy organizations by installing structured leadership systems. With over 15 years of experience in consulting and executive coaching, particularly in founder-led and private equity-backed companies, Ben focuses on improving decision-making, execution, trust, and accountability at the leadership level. His core thesis is that most organizational challenges are not strategy problems, but leadership consistency problems. Ben, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure, Steve.
Yeah. So I would love to just jump in right off that last sentence of leadership consistency problems. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so oftentimes when I get called into an organization, it's because whatever the organization's trying to do, they're not doing it well enough. So they've got product issues, they've got customer issues, they've got growth issues. But when we pull back the curtain, and we start to dig in and try to understand what's really going on here, what we often see is that the problem is less about product or strategy and more about the inherent way the organization operates, the operating system layer, if you will. And so that's where I tend to spend the majority of my time. Now, interestingly enough, the operating system of the business, how they make decisions, how they decide what to do and how to do it, how they work together, is also dependent on what's happening underneath, right? Which I refer to as the human operating system. And that is the individual health and performance of the team members that make up the organization. So things like self-awareness, trust, mindset, prioritization and focus, core skills that must exist in every member of a team in order for it to achieve or perform at its highest level.
Yeah, you mentioned it, the human operating system, and one of these core skills of self-awareness. There's over 600 young Catholic professionals here today. How can we all grow in self-awareness?
Well, great question. I think the first question is, well, what is self-awareness, right? How would you even define self-awareness? And I actually think about self-awareness as a skill, something that you can build, cultivate. Self-awareness is really two things. One, it's knowledge, self-knowledge. And specifically, I need to know who I am. And by that, I mean what I value most, what I want, right? The direction in which I want to go, the impact and outcomes that I want to create. And then third, what I need to do to make that happen, right? How to get from point A to point B. So that's the first piece of self-awareness. The second underappreciated aspect of self-awareness is your ability to share that information proactively with key stakeholders. In an organization, that's your team, it's your manager, it's the leaders in the organization. At home, it may be your spouse, your kids, your brothers and sisters, your friends. So self-awareness is one, self-knowledge, and then two, the ability to communicate that proactively, to give that information, to share that information with people who need to know it in order for you to work well together.
Yeah, so self-knowledge and then the willingness and the courageousness to communicate that to others. You know, as a young professional myself, you know, there's self-knowledge, but sometimes there's a fear to speak up or manage up, if you will, or courage to communicate those values or those desires and wants that you want to, let's say your employer, for example. How could young professionals cultivate that next step? Like, let's say they have their identity, they know their values, they know what they need. How do they take that next step to communicate that?
It's a great question. So if I'm working in an organization, my remit for the leaders is that they have to go first. So much easier to do that in an organization where your manager understands this and is demonstrating that to you and for you. If you're a young professional and you're not working in that kind of environment, it's more difficult. I often encourage my clients to create what I call a personal user guide, which is just a simple cheat sheet that has a bunch of key information on it. And I say, hey, just send that over ahead of a first meeting or interaction with someone. Share it via email. give them the opportunity, give them the option to review it. No pressure, but here's a little bit of information about me, who I am, what I care about, how I like to operate, where I come from, that may be interesting or relevant to you and to us going forward. And what often happens is the leader receives that and says, wow, this is awesome. How do I get one of these? And now you've got a virtuous cycle that has begun.
That. Yeah. Well, you did that with me when we were getting ready to organize this podcast. And I thought the same thing. I want to do this too.
Yeah.
So it sounds like just inviting it and putting it forward, and there's a lot of ways to communicate, right? That was through email with a PDF file. Not everything needs to be that conversation right away to communicate. There's ways to nudge it along.
Right. And I often say, anybody, if you're feeling reluctant, right, to share that information, it just simply means that the way you're considering sharing it is probably not the right fit for you.
Interesting.
So, the question I think is the start is, does it make sense to share that information, right? Would that be helpful? If the answer is yes, then the question is, okay, well, how do I do it in a way that feels consistent, congruent with who I am and how I like to operate?
Wow. Yeah. Maybe we could touch on that a little bit more, of this sense of psychological safety in the young professional. How could they discern if this is something I keep to myself, or I need to step out and practice courage a little bit? How could they discern that?
So I'm going to build on this, and I'm going to say, in addition to understanding yourself, or part of that self-awareness, is the importance of what I call vision. Imagine you're going to work in an organization. You walk into the CEO's office, you're being interviewed, and you ask the CEO, hey, what are we building here? What are you building here? What are we working towards? And that CEO said, I don't know. Like, we just kind of come in every day and just decide, figure out what we want to do and do it. Yeah. Right? And I was like, no, you push and you say, well, no, but like, what's the bigger picture here? What are we building towards? And the CEO's like, I don't know. We'll figure it out as we go. How likely would you be to want to work for that company and or that leader?
Not likely.
Not that likely, no. We have an expectation that the companies that we work for have clarity on what they're building towards, the impact and the outcomes that they're trying to create. And when I talk to senior leaders about this, I say, would you ever work for a company without a vision? And of course, everyone says no.
Yeah.
And yet, I then turn the question to them. What's your vision? Personally, professionally? What are you working towards? And Steve, sadly, most of even senior leaders that I work with don't have a clear and compelling understanding of the impact and the outcomes that they're trying to create in and through their life. Now, why does that matter? Because without long-term clarity, it's very hard to make short-term trade-offs. And life is trade-offs. You can't have everything, but you can have everything you want most, as long as you're willing to say no to the things that you don't want so much. And that's what I see, especially among, whether you're young or older, professionals. There's so many options from which to choose today. Many hyper-driven, talented men and women, they don't want to choose. And so they essentially just try to do it all. And you and I both know that rarely works out well.
Yes.
So going back to your initial question, how do I know if I should share or not? Well, it depends on what you're trying to move towards, right? It depends on that vision. That vision can help you better navigate some of those near-term decisions, like how do I share, what do I share, with whom?
Yeah, and you mentioned the vision and the clarity. As young professionals, you're right with the options. I'm 32 years old. There's so many paths you could go. It's overwhelming, and I'm one of those people, I get excited about all the things I want to do, but I can't, right? Yeah. So for young professionals who are working on casting a vision for their professional life and their career, how can I utilize their spiritual life and their faith to help them navigate the options ahead of them?
The most powerful prayer in my mind, and that I share this with young people all the time, but it's just as relevant to older people, is, Lord, what should I do? That prayer, it seems so basic, so simple sometimes, and yet how often do we get into that mindset of like, I got to figure out what to do?
Yeah.
And the stress and the strain, especially operating in this world, right, where there are so many options, the stress and strain of trying to navigate a universe full of compelling options to choose just one can be incredibly overwhelming to so many leaders. In fact, most people, when faced with that challenge, default to doing what they've always done because it's frankly easier to maintain the status quo than to step out in faith, right, and do something new, different, right?
Yeah.
So, Lord, what should I do? That prayer over and over and over again until you get an answer, right?
Wow.
I'll tell you a funny story. When I was your age,
Yeah.
I was 4 years into a management consulting role. I had started a little boutique with a couple of partners from McKinsey, which is a big international management consulting firm. And we were setting up and restructuring international joint ventures. So big multinationals coming together to co-own and operate businesses. They're really hard. These businesses are very hard to run well because you've got a lot of different people who want to do different things who are trying to kind of cooperate and move these businesses forward. To make a long story short, it took us a while, but we finally got this business going. And as a result, I was traveling all the time, internationally, South Africa, London, the Middle East. During this time, I met my wife, my soon-to-be wife. And we discerned the marriage was in our future. And so we started to go through pre-Cana. And we got to, we attended a retreat at the Bethesda Retreat Center, just north of Washington, D.C., which is where we live. And we were talking about marriage and the implications of marriage. And Father John Hopkins, who ran this retreat center, had this great line. He said, my job as a priest is to keep married people married. And the number one way I've discovered to keep married people married is to make sure that the wrong people don't get married in the first place. And so I thought that was great. That really spoke to my consulting brain. And I loved it until he turned his attention on me and he asked me about my career. And I told him about the business we were building and the travel that I was doing. And he said, well, Ben, that's great. Good for you. You've worked hard. You've built something special. Well done. But you have a choice. The way I see it, you can either be a world-class international management consultant or you can be a world-class husband. What's it going to be? And it's funny, Steve, because there's an expression, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I was ready for that question. I was already feeling the stress and strain of my career on even just my relationship with my then fiance. And I thought long and hard about it. I said, what would I rather? A world-class, like a terrific career and a crappy marriage, or a terrific marriage and a crappy career? And it was funny. It was just such a moment of clarity. I said, absolutely 100% terrific marriage, average career. And so, coming back to your question, how do you use your faith? Well, in and through our Catholic faith, we understand that there is a hierarchy. And that there are certain vocations that matter most. And I remember Father John and other priests that followed, you would talk often about this simple hierarchy: God, your spouse, everything else. And so when I'm advising young people about their professional path, we always start there. God, your vocation to marriage or not, and then your sort of professional vocation. And keeping that hierarchy in mind whenever you're making a decision tends to create clarity where it often doesn't exist elsewhere.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like I'm experiencing mentorship right now. So, and speaking of mentorship, what advice do you have for young professionals to seek out mentors?
Do it, right?
Yeah.
Mentors play. When you look at the lives of I don't want to use the word successful because successful could be interpreted in the wrong way, but healthy, well-adjusted humans, you almost always see the role of a mentor. When I was fresh out of college, I had moved immediately to New York after graduating from college. You are from New York. We were talking about this a little bit pre-show. I happened to be in New York on September 11th.
Wow.
At the time, I was striving. I was working my butt off to try to build a career and climb the ladder. But I was already feeling, just a year or so into my professional life, that something was off. I didn't know what to do about it. And so I did like what most people do, is I just kept working, right? I figured I could work my way out of this dilemma or this discomfort. Well, I'm walking to work on that September morning, and the first plane flies right over my head. I'm walking down Fifth Avenue. About a half hour later, I watched as the towers came down. And Steve, in that moment, the way I remember it is I heard an audible voice. And it said something along the lines of, Ben, life is short. It is time to start living more intentionally. And so I took that advice. I quit my job 3 days later, and lacking a better plan, I decided to do the thing that I knew I would regret not doing if I got to the end of my life and never had the experience. And that was to become a professional ski instructor. So I packed up my car. I moved to Aspen, Colorado.
Good spot for it.
Just in time for ski instructor tryouts. It was a good spot for it. And at the time, I'm a little bit older than you, but at the time, a very popular career advice was do what you love to do, and you'll never work a day in your life, right? Well, I loved to ski. And so all of a sudden, I found myself doing what I love to do. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, Steve, that is bad advice. Because there's a difference when you go from doing something that you love to doing something you love that you have to do well enough to get paid for, right? And so I got to the end of that first season in Aspen. I had skied about 110 days. And I, honest to goodness, if I never went skiing again, I was going to be okay with it, right? But I was feeling particularly dejected, and I really didn't know what to do because I had, I had followed my passion. I was living the dream according to other people, but I was anywhere but in a dream-like reality. And so I'm sitting on the couch one day, and this is how the Holy Spirit works, by the way, through intermediaries. And I'm reading a ski magazine of all things, and I got to the very end of the ski magazine, the last page. There was a one-page biography of this guy. And I read this biography and I said, oh my goodness, this guy has lived the life that I want to live. And it just so happened, Steve, that he was my boss. He was the CEO of the Aspen Ski Company. Now, I didn't even know his name, right? And he certainly didn't know mine.
Yeah.
But because I was working, I was part of the community, I had his email address. And so lacking a better plan, I sent him a note and I said, you don't know me, but I work for you. I read this article. You've lived a life I aspire to emulate, and I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee and just ask you about what you were doing when you were my age. And I sent this email out, cold email, with no expectation that I would ever hear back. Well, sure enough, Steve, 15 minutes later, I get an email back, and he says, thanks for the note. Don't worry about buying me a cup of coffee. Come in tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. We'll make some coffee, and we'll go from there. Wow. This gentleman's name was Pat O'Donnell, and he was my first, most important mentor. And what Pat helped me to discern and realize is that that life is full of both opportunity and uncertainty. And at the time, I was trying to navigate the world in a way to minimize risk. I didn't want to screw things up. I didn't want to ruin the opportunities or the options that I had. And he helped me to see that was not the right way to live. As he described it, he goes, Ben, you don't want a life without risk. A life without risk is a life without growth. Wow. A life without risk is a boring life. Yeah. And he said, I think what you want instead is a regret-free life. And I remember hearing that word, that language, and I thought, Steve, yes, that's exactly what I want. And so my follow-up question obviously was, yeah, that's it. How do I do that? And he laughed. He goes, oh, that's easy. I was like, it's easy. What do you mean it's easy? How can it be easy? And he's like, that's easy. You create a regret-free life when you know what you value most, and you always act in alignment with those values. That advice from my mentor, Pat, has been with me for the last 26 years. Wow. And frankly, I've been trying to discern, like it took me a while to really understand what is a value, and then more importantly, what are my values. But that way of decision making, that way of thinking has stuck with me. And I've come to realize that in a world full of options, your values are your only safety net, right? And if you're always acting in alignment with your values, even if it doesn't work out, and that's the wrinkle, right? It doesn't guarantee that you're going to get a great outcome, right? Because the world, there's just so much that is out of our control.
Yeah.
But what it does do is it guarantees that you won't look back a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and say, woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Wow.
Right? And for me, again, in this world, in this life, that is a very powerful measure of success.
Wow.
And so here, let's bring it back full circle to our faith.
Yeah.
Right? The Lord has given us a set of clear and compelling values. Now, the world at large promotes and celebrates other values.
Yes.
And I would say for the last 2 decades, I've really struggled, honestly, to navigate the tension between what matters most in the secular world and what matters most in the spiritual world. But that struggle has been edifying. That struggle has taught me so much. And what I've come to realize, again, 20 years later, is that the spiritual values, patience, humility, kindness, generosity, gratitude, will always create better outcomes than the secular values. Achievement, freedom, self, I'm blanking on the word. Self-determination.
There you
Sorry,
go. Yeah.
Self-determination. Again, these are not bad values, right? They're valuable, right? But what matters when it comes to values and values-based decision-making is largely in what order, right? Where do you put these values? All values have value, right? But as it relates to making good decisions, you have to prioritize those for yourself. Wow. And then again, use that hierarchy or use that to help interpret or frame the decisions that you make.
So it's not just about just having the self-awareness of, let's say, 5 key values. There's also an exercise to force rank them. Is that kind of the process too?
It is, yeah. And a lot of people sort of stop when it comes to values. They'll stop with, here are my 3, or here are my 5. But it really does matter in what order.
Wow.
Because oftentimes, just by changing the order of 1 or 2 values,
make a different decision.
You can make a very different decision. Wow. That's right.
How could you, if you had advice for a young professional to rank their values, how do they go about that process?
So I was the young professional, and I'm a bit obsessive about this stuff. I'm thinking to myself, how do I do this, right? How to make this easier? The best proxy for your values is your behavior, right? So if you're wondering what your values are, a lot of times you'll see people, or there are exercises where you look at a list of values and you try to choose the ones that resonate most. I've never found that to be terribly helpful. Instead, I want to observe your behavior, right? Tell me what you do and what you don't do, and we can identify your real core values from there. And then now you have an opportunity to pressure test your sort of real core values, or how you're behaving, the values that show up in your life, against the values that you say you want to put first. So, and if anybody's interested in doing this, again, I am obsessive about it, so I built a whole tool.
Wow.
If you go to sansvalues.com, it's a free behavioral-based core values assessment, and it will help you to see, what are your real values today? Compare those to the values that you want to have, and identify gaps between those two.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing, Ben.
Yeah.
Just one more question before we wrap things up. Is there anything else top of mind that, there's 600 people again here at this conference today. What would you like to tell them, though, if we didn't cover it yet?
That it's hard to be a young professional today. And this world, there's so many paths, so much distraction, so many choices. And I just want to let them know that it's hard, but the older I get, the more I've come to appreciate that our faith is such a gift in times like these. And that when it feels hard, when it feels overwhelming, when it feels like you just don't know what to do, that's when you got to come back, right? That's why we have what we have. It's the great gift that we've been given, right? That even when it feels hard, God is walking right alongside you, right? And you got to trust that He loves you and He's got a plan for your life. And to create space, especially silence, more silence in our lives, to hear, to get His advice, right? To hear what that plan is, and then to have the courage to follow it.
Wow. Thank you so much for being with us, Ben, and thank you for all you've been doing for YCP and being at the conference this week. And this was a great episode, so thank you for being a guest. Really appreciate it, Ben. So
Thanks.
just want to shout out to our conference sponsor, FIO, for helping us organize the podcast all weekend long. Just wishing you grace and peace, and may the Lord be with you.